The 10th of July 1943, Gela Licata coast. Night surf presses on the sand in black bands. Wind crosses the microphones and shreds the edge of every sound. For one suspended breath, there is only the metronome inside the bunker, the faint tick of the plotting clock, the squeak of a grease pencil on acetate, the crisp exchange of call signs sliding clean through the net. Then the horizon changes texture. Engines knit into a single chest-deep drone. First light salvos lift off the water and walk toward shore in measured strides. Shell bursts chew a staircase up the dunes. The board trembles. A lamp sways. Serra stands at the plotting table with both palms on the rim, feeling the grit of glass dust under his fingertips. His throat is dry. He keeps one shallow breath every 2 seconds to match the clock, to deny the pace rising outside. A runner clears his boots on the concrete lip and sets a strip of message tape by the map. The tape is damp. The handwriting accelerates midline. The watch officer does not look up. He reads the numbers aloud and the numbers go onto the sheet, then the sheet makes a sound like a saw when the pencil drags across the acetate overlay. The first reports arrive in pairs. Splashes beyond the line, lights on the sea masked and then unmasked by surf. An engine note that never fully recedes. Naval guns change weight and direction without warning. The bunker air tastes of cordite and damp paper. In the handset, Serra hears breathing. He can map to the corridor outside, then a click, then silence, then the next voice entering on top of the previous one by a fraction of a second. He closes his eyes and traces the coastline memorized from weeks of rehearsal. Every curve is familiar. Every inlet has a plan against it. The plans require pauses between waves. The chalk marks on the horizon do not pause. The silhouettes thicken into rows. Bow doors drop and stay open as if the sea itself had hinges. Landing craft roll forward and disappear, then return from the darkness with their cargo spaces already filled again. The board receives a new column. Tons per hour landed, estimated from observed hull density and cycle time. The number nudges upward and then slides upward again, and then the tick on the wall becomes a kind of sneer. A coastal gun finds a line and holds it for 3 rounds. The next salvo from the ships throws dust from the ceiling, and the board's compass skitters to the edge of the table. Signals remain clean for 90 seconds at a time. Captains enunciate as though pronunciation can steady the ground. The network saturates and thins and saturates again. The plotting lamps flicker with each overpressure wave. A bracketed fire solution is ready for a target that refuses to be singular. Serra adjusts his tie as if that could close the space between the plan and the surf. He repeats his private oath without moving his lips. Never order a retreat from a prepared line. The words pass his teeth like inventory. Outside the bunker, the surf stacks white on white. Inside the board accretes data like a reef. A runner places a fresh overlay that smells of spirit ink. The watch officer announces a correction to the offload rate. The correction is larger than the original number. Serra writes it with a heavy hand so the pencil will not chatter. On the wall, the minute hand slides through its arc as if it had been greased by the same oil that coats the landing ramps. The diary fragment arrives by intercept translated on the fly in a stiff whisper. If it sticks, replace it. If it breaks, roll another. The line sits on the table like a tool no one has been taught to use. In the corridor, somebody laughs, once the short kind of laugh men make when a valve slips but the system still runs. The laugh stops when a naval salvo hammers the upper air and grit whispers down the concrete like rain. A mobile reserve waits for a seam. The seam does not appear. Between waves, there should be room for a counterstroke, a corridor of naked seconds. Instead, there is only the conveyor rhythm of engines and the clock. The radio net begins to speak over itself in a single braided sentence. A range drum sticks and then turns. A gun layer calls deflection with a voice that wobbles on the last digit and then steadies out of pride. The battery fires again and again into a problem that is multiplying behind the smoke. The assumption lasts 3 minutes. It fails without drama, the way a line fails when the load never falls. Serra watches the tonnage curve tip up another notch and realizes that time has changed sides. He holds the pencil above the acetate for 1 extra beat, as if he can arrest the second hand by not writing. The engines deny him. Hull numbers keep arriving. Spray ghosts the glass. Perfect columns on a perfect board meet a shoreline that does not care. His perfect table meets their perfect conveyor. They had laughed at the shape long before the shooting started. Hinged bows, slab sides, a draft so shallow it looked like a child's toy kicked along a puddle. Steel plate welded with a haste that offended men raised on files and bluing stones. The first time he saw the drawings, he thought the hull lines were a joke, posted on a notice board. Then the joke arrived through the morning haze and put its mouth on the beach. The bow dropped with a cough of chains and a bang that felt like a gate being slammed on an assembly floor. Trucks walked out in pairs. A dozer blinked salt off its headlights and shouldered the sand into obedience. The ramp went up, and the ship backed off like a cart returning to the end of a line. He reached for refuge in the clean language of tactics, angles of fire, interdiction zones, the neat promise of a counterstroke into the pause. The pause did not show. A second hull took the same bite from the shoreline, then a third. The ledger in his head had to learn new units. He tried to keep the math inside familiar rails, casualties against objectives, shells against targets, minutes against miles. The new column resisted all the old comforts. One complete cycle of that ugly bow door equaled a trainload of war. A rake of rail cars delivered without a single whistle, rolled straight onto dirt and pointed inland. Axles became the count that mattered. Wheel hubs were coins. Fuel drums were minutes of life stamped in black letters. Hours stopped being hours. They became conveyor length. A voice on the intercept tried to make a joke of it. Boeing ladders, consolidated boxes. He wanted to enjoy the contempt. Then the sky stepped down in tidy rectangles that were not beautiful and did not need to be. Bombers crossed the beach like carpenters carrying planks. The planks became a roof over everything that fired back. The ships listened to the men with binoculars on the dunes, who were listening to the men in the air, and the whole arrangement moved as if a single wrist rotated it. He had seen orchestras try for that and fail. The factory did not fail. Rinaldi sat under the lamp, with the headset sealing her to the net. Her pupils had pushed wide to drink the light. The brown of her irises squeezed into a ring. Traffic began to layer. Two voices overlapped by a syllable, then three, then a braided sentence with clauses from different mouths. She cut her words to keep pace. Articles died first, then adjectives. Call signs lost everything but the hard consonants. She learned to split her hearing nouns from one channel, numbers from the next, bearing from a third. Sweat gathered at her temples and did not fall because the headset clamped the hair flat. She hated the weight, then forgave it because it narrowed the world down to something survivable. He reached for blame he could control. A battery masked by haze. A reserve delayed by a bend in a road. A field of fire not cleared to the last bush. He bent over the map and willed cause to retake ground from effect. The plotting officer read out a revised offload estimate. The revision was larger than the original number, by a margin that made the pencil bite the acetate. A single landing ship, one hinge cycle, delivered a yard of rail. Two made a branch line. A dozen wrote a timetable on the coast and dared him to erase it. He could not erase it with will. He could not erase it with doctrine. The air smelled of hot copper, damp paper, machine oil, and the tired dust that falls from ceilings when big guns speak. Shock rolled through the walls and made the lampshades ring like thin bells. Men moved without wasted steps now, not from drilled elegance, but because anything extra fell off under the drag of that noise. He had once adored the slow care of a pre-war works. Old men in blue coats, coaxing a breech to slide so sweetly you felt the virtue in your palm. He loved how the tool marks disappeared until the metal looked born that way. That feeling returned now and turned on him. It felt expensive and helpless. Out beyond the dunes, another bow door hit wet sand. Chains clanked. A jeep bounced once and carried a wire spool into the first track cut by the dozer. A corporal with his cap crooked set the spool down and began paying out line inland. The wire looked like the string a child would lay for a game. It was a vein. He could see it as a vein even from here. The net filled and thinned in waves that did not match the surf. Rinaldi clipped the tail off a word and stitched the head of the next one to it. Her handwriting lost its loops and became teeth. She began to print. He felt a treachery open in his chest and decided it was love, then filed it under math to keep it from killing him. Each clipped syllable meant a shell, where it had to go, a truck moving when it needed to move, a lane opened by a blade that did not wait for orders to be written in perfect script. He realized that the system he had worshipped depended on pauses, not because pauses were elegant, but because pauses protected vanity. Engines made a single body and pressed down on the coastline. Naval guns shifted weight as if they resented anyone asking them to be dramatic. The sea gave up hulls with stamped numbers like tags on livestock. He had mocked that once numbers instead of names. Now numbers felt like a promise kept on time. The inland roads began to carry dust in a steady line. Not bursts, not surges, continuity. That was the sin against his first faith. A thing that did not need to peak to win. He took the handset, and the wire trembled against his jaw. Two reports collided in his ear and traveled through him like trains passing in a cutting. He repeated both stripped to bone. Range and deflection first, then the lane code, then the minutes since last offload. He heard his own voice lose its polish and improve. He wrote a private sentence in the margin where no one would see it. Finish is a story we tell when time is kind. Time is not kind. Time is a foreman with chalk in his fist. The chalk ran from surf to horizon in a straight line. The men who made the ugly ships obeyed the line. They did not argue with it, or lecture it, or sing to it. They brought the next hull, the next axle, the next drum, the next crate, the next wing. The hinge banged and the ramp fell, and the shore learned a new language. He looked down at the table that had once promised that a few perfect blows at the decisive point could break any mass. The board was still beautiful. The columns were straight. The acetate was clear. None of those virtues could alter the minute hand. The betrayal did not arrive as drama. It arrived as meters of steel, paid out from a door he had laughed at. He let the laughter go. He kept the math. Dawn dries the mist, just enough to show the bends in the river and the road curling toward Ponte di Rillo. Orders run like wire through the core net and find the units they are meant to find. A mobile group noses out from an olive grove engines held at a shy throttle, so the first burst of speed will feel like a secret. Tracks kiss the macadam and throw a fine spray of gravel that patters against fenders like rain. On the bluffs, guns are already laid to the mark. Elevations checked twice. Deflections spoken in clean pairs. The board has become a body. The body begins to move. The first barrage walks across a designated rectangle on the beach, exits, and leaves a neat corridor of dust. Observers on the ridge see trucks hesitate and backlight in the haze. A follow-up bracket locks the corridor shut. The mobile group climbs its short grade and breaks into a sprint that makes every man larger inside his own chest. They have practiced this cut hundreds of times in the mouth, and once on real ground. They are on time to the minute. Their line is good. The wheel hands sit quiet on the spokes to keep from blessing the moment with the wrong kind of pride. Contact comes in a clean arc. A forward gun flashes at a map mark and dies in the second flash because counter battery is awake and accurate. Then the flank tube finds the lane and breathes. The first two belts chew at a tangle of vehicles waiting for a path inland. Something collapses with a sound like timber. The mobile group's lead vehicle throws smoke on a hairpin, clips a low wall, and recovers without losing the cadence. For a handful of seconds, the ground answers the plan with the obedience of a diagram. The watch officer calls the time from the bunker. 4 minutes since the first coordinated salvo. The number has weight, because the last week taught them what 4 minutes can buy. Then the net stiffens. Voices that had been single file begin to overlap. The sorties per hour number steps upward 1 notch, and then another small steps, but the kind of small that turns a thread into rope. Naval guns farther out shift weight. The gap between their patterns shrinks until the pattern looks continuous. Rounds land on the grid squares that are not supposed to be visible to sea fire. A long-experienced man swears softly without words and resets his slide rule because the problem has changed while he was solving it. Sergeant Conti stands on the gun platform with his palm flat to the elevation wheel to feel the motion through his skin. The metal is warm and then hot. He adjusts with a tiny inward roll of the wrist that in peacetime would have drawn a compliment. Overpressure climbs with each salvo thrown back by the ships. Dust moves like water. The wheel jumps a tooth. His fingers already stim to keep from trembling let a little shake free. He traps it with anger. The angle he had carried in his head all morning refuses to sit where it belongs and slips a degree and a half low. A shell lands short and bursts on the near slope, throwing a sheet of dirt that slaps his boots. He corrects and the correction holds for 2 rounds, then the platform takes a punch from air and steel and the wheel skids again. He does the right steps in the right order and watches them not matter. The mobile group pushes into the seam that had been mapped as a seam and finds a texture instead. Each opening grows teeth as it is born. Bulldozers on the beach carve an exit where the last pass had been cratered. Ramps hit wet sand with the reliable bang of a factory press and pour new axles into the mess. A reserve platoon clears the hairpin with a crisp clatter of track and runs into a curtain of fragments raised by ships they cannot see. A driver ducks overcorrects by a hand's width and threads a ditch by luck and memory rather than intent. He laughs once, a noise the size of a coin. Observers call for a shift on the naval pattern. The ships answer in 90 seconds or less. The first fall of shot misses by a distance that can still be lived through. The second lands on the coordinates as if the hillside had asked politely to be struck there. The hillside sheds stones like breath. An ammunition carrier stacked to regulation takes a near burst and becomes a lesson in why regulation has limits. Rinaldi rides the net with her jaw set to avoid clenching. She has learned to count voices without counting. 3 channels cross. She pulls nouns and numbers from each and braids them back into the order log. Her pupils stay wide. She does not blink for long stretches, because blinking is a luxury purchased with seconds she cannot afford. When a call sign repeats itself too fast to be anyone but a man who wants to be heard, she murders his excess with silence, then gives him the one word that keeps his world from falling apart. The lamp throws a ring of heat across her cheekbones. Sweat stings into the hairline and holds. On the ridge, Conti hears the pitch change. He does not have the vocabulary to call it sorties per hour, but his spine carries the number. He leans into his wheel and thinks only of holding the mouth of the gun steady in a storm he can neither see nor kick down. The drill is perfect, because drill is what remains when thought would slow the hand. Casing out, casing in breech check coal fire. The wall of pressure arrives in a long cord and makes the tiny bones in his ear complain. He hears another gun on the line, drop out, hears it return, hears it drop again. The textbook assumes pressure is a constant and noise a background. The textbook does not have a chapter for a room that breathes. The counterattack bleeds speed without braking. Engines thicken the air around the road bend. The smell of clutch and cordite blends into a kind of taste. A tank takes a hit that peels a strip of paint and pride without harming the crew. The crew whoops because they are alive, and that feels like competence. In front of them, the exit lane they meant to seal grows a twin, as if the earth has decided to help their enemy. A dozer blade lifts, swings, drops, and a truck's nose tracks the new path as if it had been born to it. The bow doors out at the waterline continue their hinge prayer without interest in the men arguing inland. The watch officer gives another time mark. 7 minutes. Then 8. The 4 that looked like victory now look like foreplay for a beating measured in minutes. The strike that made sense when the air was thin now fights in a room so crowded with new weight that lines bend under the load. Naval guns retarget again with the kind of speed that says the range tables were printed yesterday or do not matter because the men on the phones have found a better way to think. A runner skids on dust and catches himself on the table edge so hard that the lamps hop. Serra does not look up. He keeps the pencil against the acetate so the tip does not stutter. He listens to the rhythm under the words. It is not the hammer rhythm of victory. It is the steady motor of a thing that does not care about brilliance. The mobile group reports a position gained and another lost on the way to keeping it. He writes both with the same hand, same pressure. Conti's fingers finally betray him. The tremor he had kept in the wrist moves into the fingertips. He chases a half-degree with motions so delicate they would have impressed a man with time to be impressed. Another concussive breath from the sea lands on the platform, and the wheel slips again. He swallows bile and resets. The drill still works. The drill works like prayer, true and helpless when the sky decides not to listen. The last clear glimpse of the seam shows it closing under a flow of vehicles that do not hurry because they do not need to. Trucks nose past wrecks, and men step around holes, as if the ground had been designed with polite obstacles for a training course. The counterattack, perfect in shape and honest in courage, now feels like someone drawing a sword inside a foundry. There is heat and motion everywhere that does not care about the sword's lineage. When the recall clicks onto the net, it does not sound like surrender. It sounds like arithmetic. The line that was supposed to hold for effect now holds for survival. Engines reverse tracks bite gravel backward guns, shift to cover rather than finish. Discipline maintains the withdrawal with the same precision it applied to the advance. It does not save the idea that launched the advance. The idea requires a world with pauses. The world today has none. The wall moves first. A slow flex in the concrete, as if the bunker inhales with the sea. Then, the roll arrives. A synchronized push from the ships that climbs through the floor and turns marrow to glass. Lamps tremble. Dust lifts and hangs like breath you can see. Before the last echo has finished with the ceiling, the sky lays its next layer, a bomber pass in measured steps, the engines climbing into a single tone that lays a plank across the valley. Shock meets shock and makes a chord. The room loses its corners and becomes a drum. Sarah's hand is already on the pencil when the first overpressure wave makes it jump. The tip ticks the acetate and leaves a scar that does not belong to any road. He tightens his fingers to calm the line and watches the pencil slip again. He lets it go. It falls, bounces once, and rolls into the gutter along the board. His pulse is in his teeth now. It climbs with the engines until his jaw is a metronome he cannot switch off. He tries to count. The count breaks. He starts again and hears the number in his throat instead of his head. About 128. Breath comes in short, even sips that double without his permission. The body has decided on its own drill. The net fills with voices trimmed to bone, bearings, ranges, a lane code, a call sign that stutters and corrects itself like a man catching his foot on the edge of a step. Rinaldi syllables clip and slot into each other without waste. The room has learned to run without adverbs. Naval guns change weight again, a clean transition, like a machine engaging a new gear. The hillside above the left flank hisses gravel for 3 long seconds and then shakes itself clear. A runner comes in sideways to avoid the table skids, slaps a palm to the edge and leaves a dark print of sweat and dust. The mobile group reports in pieces. A position gained, then lost while keeping it. A vehicle down with crew alive. A battery blinded for a count of 5 by smoke that refuses to drift. It is not panic. It is the sound of men who have run out of promises. Timing is everything, and timing belongs to the other side now. He feels the oath like a small stone in the mouth. Never order a retreat from a prepared line. The stone has edges. He has carried it without blood for years because the tongue learns the shape of a thing and stops complaining. Now the edge is cut. He places his palm flat on the table to steady the room, and the table is not steady. The building breathes under another naval roll. The bomber tone steps down the ladder, lower, then holds. The air thickens into a weight that pins the lungs open, but does not fill them. A shell lands close. The pressure is a hand on the chest from a giant who does not care what he breaks as long as the hand keeps moving. Conti's line stutters, returns, stutters again. A gun team somewhere down the ridge reports a broken sight, then amends the report not broken, untrue under pressure. The difference matters to men who will live past noon. He writes neither word, because his hands have learned humility. Rinaldi turns her head a fraction to free one ear from the cup and let the room speak to her without wire. Her pupils are full dark. The lamp makes coins of sweat along her hairline. She is not afraid, not in any way language can parse. She is busy like a blade. He finds himself about to say her name without reason. He swallows the name because names are a luxury, and because saying it would be the same as begging the wall not to move. He looks at the map and sees nothing noble in the geometry. Arrows that in staff lectures carry the breath of old victories now look like fingerprints left on glass by a proud man. The coast is no longer a line. It is a mouth that keeps eating. The exits they closed have grown twins. The seam they chased across the road has become texture. Every success is a scratch on a surface that heals faster than it can be marked. He tries to make the failure tactical, because tactical failure can be answered with courage. The failure does not sit there. It slides out of his grasp and joins the engines. Another roll. A tremor in the floor that finds his knees and climbs to the hinge of his jaw. In the ear he keeps for his own thought, a quiet voice says that holding for honor wastes a battalion for nothing but a sentence in a report. The voice is not sentimental. It speaks in units of time. He listens to it because it sounds like arithmetic. He has loved arithmetic longer than he has loved vows. He leans toward the handset, and it leaps once under his fingers with the next shock. He grips it harder than he means to, and hears the skin squeak on bakelite. The first word comes out whole. The second arrives with half its vowels missing. The order goes out in a short line, a jog back, a shallow hook to a secondary ridge. Keep the line shaped, do not let it tear, move now. He hears himself repeat it because the net needs the repetition. The repeat is worse. The consonants are stones in a shallow stream. A silence follows that is not silence. A chorus of acknowledgments lands in staggered pairs. Not a single man asks for the word to be softened. No one says impossible. It is the kind of obedience that feels like accusation. He knows what he has done because his heart eases by a single inch, and his face heats with that relief. The shame blooms exactly where the ease lives. He does not look at the wall clock because he does not want to meet the eyes of the minute hand. He can feel it anyway, slicing the air with professional indifference. Rinaldi does not flinch when the word is said. She trims it and sends it forward along lanes that were drawn months ago for contingencies they were meant never to use. Her breath holds at the end of each line as if to count the men who will live, because of this then burns at the thought of what the living costs. She does not let the cost touch her hands. The hands are busy. The hands must be faster than the shame. Outside, the mobile group turns its front like a fish finding a new current. Tracks snap stone. Engines drop a gear and learn to go backward at the same pace they went forward. Guns that had been eager now become careful. They lay smoke with a care usually reserved for the first rounds of a parade. The ridge accepts them without comment. The ships adjust again in less than 90 seconds. The new pattern lands where a clump of men had been a moment before. The dust shapes itself around ghosts and then chooses a new face. Serra reaches for the pencil. It is where it rolled, caught between board and lip. He retrieves it and notices with the crystalline clarity of a man beyond his dignity the tiny nick at the graphite tip. He sharpens it with a knife that has been too finely honed for this work. The blade scrapes. The graphite dust falls like ash on the acetate. He writes the order in the log in the cleanest letters he can make because he still has that to offer. The letters stand straight and thin. Their uprightness feels like mockery. A bomber steps off its ladder and the engines recede by a degree. The room exhales. The wall releases its breath. He hears feet running in the corridor and the soft grunt of a man lifting a box that is heavier than he thought. The net evens. The withdrawal is underway and orderly. The battalion that would have been spent for pride will live long enough to be used again. The numbers approve. The oath sits broken in the mouth edges, dulling now that blood has taught the tongue a new shape. He waits for regret to arrive as a grand thing. It does not. It arrives as the feel of sweat cooling under his collar, with no clean handkerchief to attend it. It arrives as the understanding that the board he worshipped has become a good table for writing down the victory of other people's clocks. Irrelevance does not shout. It stands beside you and performs your job better, because it does not care about the ceremony. He looks at the map one more time, not to be moved, but to see clearly the place where an idea ended and arithmetic took the ground. The engines outside promise to return in the same number or more. The men inside promise to move where the numbers say they can still be of use. He repeats the order once more for a company that missed it in the overlap. The voice that leaves his mouth is clipped and steadier than the man who owns it. He knows that steadiness is all he has left that can be called honor today. He takes it and sets it down on the table like a tool. The tool is ugly. The tool works. The strand holds the day's print like wet clay cooling under a skin. Surf folds itself in narrow breaths and leaves a lace of foam that vanishes before it can be counted. No men in view for 100 paces, only the remains of an argument that time has already decided. A ramp lies twisted, where a landing ship shook loose and backed away without retrieving it. The hinge teeth bitten half through the steel, scarred by shoe soles and track cleats, and the corners of crates. Serra steps down from the dune and feels the sand accept his weight with the reluctant sigh of a tired animal. He walks to the ramp as if approaching a wrecked altar. The edge nearest the water is feathered with salt, the plating flaked to raw metal in scallops, each flake a small calendar of use. He lays his hand on the stamped face and feels the story come up through the bones of his palm heat load speed. The stampings repeat every span of his fingers. Numbers, lot codes, inspection marks. He tries to remember the last time he saw such brutal honesty in a component and cannot. The plate gives a cold back. It does not ask to be admired. Beyond the iron mouth, the beach carries the tracks of a day that refused to pause. Parallel ruts curve inland, cross separate, rejoin. Some end in short trenches, where a driver took a turn too tight and recovered by luck and continuity. Some cut clean to the dune gap and vanish into the brush. A length of broken 2x8, once a shim under a ramp foot, leans against a sand hummock with a nail still bright in it. He picks it up and turns it. The grain shines with salt and oil. He puts it back, not out of reverence, but because it belongs in this book. Shadows pass over the sand. He lifts his eyes to the sky and finds the Douglas silhouettes pacing inland. Not a raid. A march. 3, then 5, then a line he cannot see the end of, because the air above the interior hills is a white glare. Their engine note has lost drama. It has become a background pressure, the sound of continuity. He watches the shadows glide across the strand and fade against the darker water, then return with the next flight, a heartbeat too regular to be argued with. He moves along the ramp's inner face. The hinge lugs are ugly in the way a knuckle is ugly when it is doing exactly what a body asks. Around the hinge pins, the steel wears a bright circle polished by motion and impatience. He imagines a crewman hitting this very pin with a hammer to free it, not with care, just with purpose. The purpose has left its ring marks like fossils. He slides his fingers over one and feels the shallow dip. He remembers a pre-war visit to a breech shop where a master fitter had drawn a file across a slide until the edge felt like a secret. He had believed then that war would reward that kind of devotion. The shore smells of diesel and fish and cordite and warm metal. None of those scents carry devotion. They carry completion. Chalk numerals ride the ramp's deck in a ladder of white ghosts. Hull numbers, section codes, times chalked by hands that did not plan to let the sea rub them away before another load replaced them. He counts the sequence backward and forward. The chalk has been stepped on, smeared, reinscribed over footprints. What matters is not the exact figure, but the admission it refuses to make room for pride. He pictures the man who wrote them, sleeve-rolled, ropey forearm, 2 quick strokes for each digit, no flourish for the tail of a 9. The sequence becomes a sentence his doctrine never taught him to read. He finishes counting and starts again because the habit holds even when the point does not. At the edge of the ramp, a torn length of webbing lies in a loop stiff with dried brine. He lifts it, and it keeps the shape of the last pull. The buckle clacks dull against the plate. He sets it back and wipes his hand on his trouser seam, a motion he has performed since the first day he was allowed to touch a map. The old gesture makes him conscious of the lack it is meant to repair. There is no ink on his palm. There is only the fine glitter of metal dust and the faint scent of oil that never quite leaves a hand once it has lived a while inside engines. A gust pushes the surf line higher. Foam kisses the ramp's lowest rung and withdraws, leaving a lace of bubbles that catch the sun one by one and wink out. Beyond the ramp, anchored off the sandbar, the ships stand without ceremony, their flanks numbered, their decks busy with small figures moving like punctuation marks. A launch crosses between them, leaving a clean V that folds and disappears without protesting. He speaks aloud because the air requires a sentence to finish what the day began. The words taste like filings and salt. Time is the decisive caliber. Our method cannot fire it. The strand does not bother to keep the line. The wind moves it a finger's width and lets it fall. Rinaldi comes down the dune path with her headset slung on one shoulder, the pads banging her ribs at each step. She says nothing at first. She looks at the hinged teeth, the chalk, the stamped numbers. Her pupils are still wider than the light requests. She reaches out and touches the deck with the back of her fingers, as if testing a skillet. Her jaw unclenches by degrees. She does not ask what will happen next. The net has already told her the only order that matters tonight: reset and prepare for repetition. He gestures at the chalk ladder. She counts by habit and stops when she realizes she is counting nothing that can be fixed by accuracy. She draws a line through air that connects Hull to Dune Gap to the inland road and then opens her hand as if releasing a bird that will not come back. When she finally speaks, her voice has the texture of a report stripped to nouns. Replace beats repair. He nods because it costs less than words. They walk the waterline to where another ramp has left a groove. In the groove, a shoe lies half buried, its leather swollen, the stitching burst. He does not let himself imagine the foot. He looks instead at the nails in the sole, how regular they are, how evenly spaced, how the last 2 near the heel perform no real function except to satisfy a template. He surprises himself by loving those 2 useless nails because they admit the urge to make even an expendable thing a little better than it needed to be. He wonders how many men he has spent to defend that feeling. A Douglas shadow crosses them. The temperature drops a fraction. He looks inland and sees dust hanging over the track like fabric on a line. Engines work somewhere he cannot see. They sound tired without sounding weak. He could love that sound if it belonged to his side. He does not let the thought run. A crate splinter lies with its stencil still legible. He kneels and traces the letters. The paint has bled into the grain in a way that would have offended the shop foreman in his memory. The letters can be read from a car moving at speed. That is what the letters were for. He sits back on his heels and feels the ache of age and the ache of a day that has taught a lesson without mercy. The sun finds a seam in the cloud and throws a slab of light across the strand. In the slab, a line of tiny shells shines and then dulls as a cloud edge moves. He thinks of medals stored in drawers the day after a war ends. He thinks of hands that will fold the drawers shut and take meals and start accounts and mow grass and tell children to finish the bread on their plates. He is ashamed of those thoughts because they arrive before the men on the ridge have finished folding their maps. He allows them anyway, because refusing them would be another way to pretend the day did not say what it said. He rises and steps back onto the ramp. The angle makes his ankles work harder. The hinge teeth grip his boot soles with a confident bite. He looks down through the rust scabs and sees a line of air between steel and sand. The structure is at rest. It is also ready to move as soon as a cable bites it and a winch pays in. Everything here is like that at rest, in a posture designed only so it can become motion again without complaint. The shadows build, the light thins. Two men appear at the far end of the strand and stop when they see him standing alone on the iron tongue. They turn aside without saluting. He is grateful for the lack. He does not want to be the only person here still performing the old rites. He puts a palm flat to the plate one more time and feels under the cold the ghost warmth of a day's traffic. He counts backward from 10 in a cadence that used to calm him before an inspection. The count does not calm, it clarifies. When he reaches one, he takes his hand away. A gull lands on the ramp's edge and pecks at a rope thread. It pulls tests, loses interest, lifts off. Serra steps down and leaves the strand to the small lives that will reclaim it between shifts. On the climb up the dune, he pauses once and looks back. The chalk digits have blurred into suggestion. The surf takes a little of the iron smell and gives a little salt back. The sky holds its line of patient engines. Nothing in the scene asks for eloquence. Everything asks for acceptance. He waits for the part of him that still wants the table to be sacred to protest. It does not. It only marks the positions where men will sleep and the roads where they will move before dawn. He gives the ramp a last inventory from the ridge hinge teeth deck stamped chalk webbing groove. Each item equals minutes. Each minute equals a breath kept or wasted. The waste he understands now was not in the courage. It was in the idea that courage could substitute for a clock. He says the sentence again softer, so the wind can shear it thin. Time is the decisive caliber. Our method cannot fire it. Then he turns inland, because the inland is where time goes when a shore has already done its work. Night folds back from the ridge and leaves the coast in a pale geometry of ruts, ramps, and numbered hulls. The board in the bunker is clean again. New acetate stretched tight columns, ready for a morning that will not ask for beauty. Men sleep in crooked rows, with boots under their calves, and hands open on their chests, not from peace, but from the precision of exhaustion. Serra stands at the doorway long enough to watch a runner step carefully over a sleeping wrist, and then turn inland where the dust hangs above the road like patient cloth. The numbers he kept all day do not argue anymore. They settle into ratios that refuse sentiment. Tons per hour against minutes to collapse. Sorties per hour against breaths left in a fixed position. Replacement time against repair time. Every column that once promised victory to the most skilled hand has found its opposite weighting with a shorter cycle. He had always believed the virtue in a weapon lived in the care put into it. Today, the virtue lived in whether a weapon could be there again before the smoke fell. Resource over time defeats precision over time because time belongs to the system that can pay it in bulk. The thought does not arrive as a surrender. It arrives as a technician's note in a margin changed the unit of account. He had been counting finesse. The field counts minutes. He had balanced a plan on pauses. The enemy erased pauses and wrote continuity in their place. He can dislike the handwriting and still admit he is reading the only text the ground obeys. At first light, the sea answers the sky with a low engine sheet, not loud, only constant. The strand shows where yesterday's hinge teeth bit and where today's will bite with the same indifference to anyone's oath. He remembers the file drawn across a breach in a quiet shop and lets the memory go where it belongs, a museum of beautiful things that could not change a clock. He does not hate the shop. He hates the lie that said its finish could command minutes. Rinaldi comes up beside him with a roll of fresh line codes under her arm. The headset hangs from her shoulder like an animal that has been fed and now sleeps. Her pupils have come down to size. She says that the lanes will be renumbered to shorten the syllables that waste signal. He nods. It is not poetry. It is the grammar of survival. He adds that messages will carry timestamps first, not last. She agrees without praise. They stand in air that smells of diesel, wet earth, and paper that has been dried too many times above a stove. A truck rattles past with sideboards bowed by crates. Stencils blur into smudges at speed and still carry meaning because the letters were never meant for admiration. Two men ride the tailgate and eat bread in even bites without looking at each other. The scene has no hero in it. It has a schedule. Schedules make cowards of vows and soldiers of habits. He will teach habits. He writes a sentence for the morning briefing and reads it once into his own chest to hear whether it holds. The war's true balance is technical availability, controls time, time controls outcomes. He does not need to raise his voice to launch it. He needs to change how the room counts. The map will lose some arrows and gain more clocks. The order sets will shrink. The maintenance tables will learn new verbs: swap, cannibalize, discard, replace. The inspection handbook will be amended to measure readiness in minutes, not perfection in microns. He knows the men who will dislike that. He knows he was one of them yesterday. He thinks of the battalion he pulled back and the heat that ran through his face when relief followed the order. That heat had felt like shame. It was the body learning a new unit. The unit was life extended by time bought with motion. It will not look noble in a book. It will look like a column strength, preserved minutes, gain debt paid later by weight arriving on time. History may never say those words out loud. The beach already has. He walks the corridor and stops where the wall paint buckled under last night's overpressure and flaked into a slope of white chips. He pinches a chip between thumb and forefinger until it powders. He will not describe this day as tragedy. Tragedy requires gods. This was accounting. He will not tell his officers to be less proud. He will tell them to be proud of different things: of a gun that fires again after a swap no artisan would bless, of a lane opened in the time it takes to say the order, of a plan that measures success in minutes denied to the enemy. When the briefing begins, he gives them a line they can carry without metaphor. For every minute we planned, they landed 5. He lets the silence after it work because silence is sometimes the cleanest instrument. He sees the men assemble, the math in their eyes. Some flinch. Some nod once. All of them know what a minute weighs now. He closes without flourish. The sea is already writing the next page. The air is already pressing it down. He offers them 3 lines to fix the doctrine where memory can find it fast. Perfection dies where the conveyor arrives first. Time favors the army that replaces faster than it repairs. Availability is victory measured in minutes.